Watergate Building in Washington. This is Hotline TV. Now, here's Hotline editor, John Mercurio.
Welcome to Hotline TV. I'm John Mercurio.
And I'm Amy Walter. This weekend brought the Democratic contenders together in a series of events, beginning at their first debate in Orangeburg, South Carolina, ending with the California Democratic Convention in San Diego. At each event, the candidates competed with sound bites and speeches. John, how do you think they stacked up?
Well, I think Hillary obviously did a much better job in South Carolina over Obama. Obama did a much better job in California. Hillary actually drew some jeers and some hecklers during the
But it's the format, right? Just as like who can do the 60-second versus who can do the long speech. Who can do the?
I think that's true, and I think it's also the sort of the different demographics that go into these gatherings. I think in South Carolina you had you're right. I mean, it has a lot to do with the format. She wasn't going to get people jeering and heckling her during the debate, but she also found a much more receptive following throughout South Carolina, I thought, which was interesting. You know, considering her vote on the war. But I think the fact that there were a lot of people in South Carolina, a lot of Democrats who support her position on the war as opposed to Obama's, whereas in California you get a much more liberal crowd, a much more sort of netroots crowd, which loves Obama and it's not so crazy about her. And a lot of the talk coming out of this whole weekend where, you know, they were sort of uneven. You saw Hillary and Obama, the two frontrunners, with uneven performances. A lot of the talk on Monday, Sunday and Monday, was about who in the second tier is going to pose the challenge to them. Who is going to come up?
Well, it sure seems like John Edwards is trying to be the candidate who is moving the furthest. He's obviously the candidate moving furthest to the left, trying to make himself as appealing as possible to primary voters, while essentially hamstringing himself for the general election. Right? Every time he moves over, whether it's on healthcare, on taxes, on the war, he just seems to say, well, all right, I'll be that candidate then for those frustrated activists, for the netroots. I'll do all those things, and then I'm going to come into the general election, which the fear among some Democrats is, well, boy, we have to have somebody that at least looks like, you know, he has the Southern accent, he's somebody who is a white Southerner, has an appeal in ways that Hillary and Obama wouldn't, and at the same time, he is now obviously on the furthest left of the field, so he's not exactly positioning himself to be the best general election
that's
candidate.
very true. The other thing I thought that was interesting about this weekend, the sort of microcosm, you know, of the South Carolina events last week and the end of last week, and then the weekend in San Diego, California. It was such a microcosm of the campaign as it exists today. Right. You've got such an early primary right now with California on February 5th, and South Carolina just a few weeks before that. That you are literally having these candidates traipsing across the country back and forth, and what could have been a full weekend in South Carolina, or at least an additional day, was cut short because all these guys had to get all the way out to San Diego.
Well, let's see how many times they go ahead and do this. I mean, you're right, it brings up a really good point, which is at what point, both just for time-wise and for money-wise, can you afford to keep going back and forth across the country, whether it's to Nevada or California? What happens to those states that are much easier to get to? They still can get the attention. But you're right, normally we would look at the California Democratic Convention this weekend and say, well, that's fine, you know, the activists, who they like, who they didn't like, that's all good and well, but the fact of the matter is it really doesn't matter because it's going to be over by the time we get out of Iowa and New Hampshire. This time it could matter, but maybe not.
To your point, I mean, exactly. You know, I think one of the biggest casualties of this early primary thing is going to be Nevada, frankly.
Exactly.
And not necessarily the entire state of Nevada, but any city, any town, any resident, any voter who lives outside of Las Vegas is not going to see a lot of these guys coming through because, look, their campaign travel schedules are going to be so tight. They're basically going to fly into Vegas, make an occasional trip to Reno or Carson City, but because of this tightly compressed travel schedule, they're not going to be making those trips up to Elko County, although McCain is there this week. You know, to that I think a lot, or Lake Tahoe, that I think a lot of these people outside of Las Vegas.
I'll go to Lake Tahoe for one of them if they need to.
I can be a paid surrogate. I'm more than happy to be a man for hire.
In like August or something.
Nice.
But you know, it also goes back to the point that this is the hard part about Nevada too. It is fast growing. There are new people moving in every 15 minutes.
98% of them live in Las Vegas.
Exactly, and there's not a history of that sort of political activism in the same way of South Carolina. Jim Clyburn always has his fish fry in a parking garage.
Right. What does Shelley Berkeley have? Does Shelley Berkeley have a
I don't know. We should ask
any
her.
kind of fry? No.
I don't know if they do a lot of that fry. They do a lot of buffets in Las Vegas, so maybe that's what they should have, is a Democratic buffet. See how that is.
All right, looks like we're out of time for today. We'd like to apologize in advance to Chris Dodd for not giving him a chance to say anything or for us to say anything about him. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on Hotline TV.